how long would you like to comfortably go today?
Oh, it's up to you. I'm all yours. So please continue as long as you want to.
Well, you may be sorry.
If I fall asleep, then you know.
Well, then I'll know. Yeah. My guest today is Professor Olle Johansson from Sweden. He is a neuroscientist who's done pioneering work on how synthetic fields affect our health and who's been a strong voice for raising awareness and calling for precaution. You can easily recognize Olle either on the streets of Stockholm or at a scientific gathering because he will be the one who has no cell phone. Olle, welcome back to the EMF
Thank
Remedy
you very
podcast.
much indeed. It's a great honor to be back again, and I look forward talking to you, dear Keith.
Yes. I have so much looking forward to this. Now, you've made me aware and other people aware that you've recently done some work with Davida van der Walt down in,
Yeah.
Is it South Africa? Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
I just wanted to mention it because, well, for two reasons. Number one, people who have not seen that, it's called the In the Know, and I'll put a link in the description for this video. Should check that
Thank
out.
you.
There's a lot of wonderful work there from both of you, and so I appreciate
you.
that. The other reason I brought it up is because there was something fascinating that I wasn't aware of in one of the sections. So I'd like to start with talking about that, and it is the fact that so much is made of the difference between ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation, as if to sort of dismiss the non-ionizing radiation as of no consequence, because after all, it's not ionizing. But the really surprising thing is, and I'd like to read a list of symptoms, shared symptoms, and I believe these are from workers of both the Chernobyl cleanup and common everyday exposures from those who are sensitive to synthetic fields. So with regard to neurological symptoms that are shared, we have headaches, dizziness, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, depression, anxiety, insomnia, chronic fatigue, weakness, tremors, tingling, joint or muscle pain, and in severe cases, seizures and strokes observed in both groups. In terms of cardiac, we have palpitations, arrhythmias, chest pain, fluctuations in blood pressure, irregular heart rate, shortness of breath. In terms of respiratory, bronchitis, asthma, pneumonia, recurrent sinus infections, dermatological, skin rashes, itching, burning, sensations, flushing, abnormal sensitivity to touch, and ophthalmologic, eye pain, burning, pressure behind the eyes, deteriorating vision, and cataracts are shared effects. Auditory, buzzing, ringing, or other phantom sounds, tinnitus. Hearing loss. Reproductive, we have reduced fertility, abnormal menstruation, miscarriage, congenital anomalies, hematological and immune system. We have anemia, abnormal platelet, white blood cell counts, immune suppression, susceptibility to infections, and then other or systemic digestive problems, abdominal pain, thyroid enlargement, hair loss, brittle nails, dental fragility, frequent nosebleeds, dehydration, light sensitivity. I have seen so many of these things, or people have shared so many of these things with me among my sensitive friends and clients as well. I guess I'll just pause for a moment here and ask you, is it true that these symptoms are shared both by synthetic people experiencing what we consider to be normal now, synthetic field exposures, as well as the workers that did the cleanup on Chernobyl, which was, of course, dealing with ionizing radiation?
Well, indeed, yes. And also you can add other types of ionizing radiation like X-ray damage, particularly in the beginning when people were heavily exposed to X-rays. People didn't really realize, like radiologists, that it was dangerous. There is, for instance, memory stone, or what you call it. I think it's in Hamburg in Germany, with more than 200 names of radiologists that in the early days died because they got radiation damage from the X-rays. Of course, today we protect both the medical doctors, the nurses, and the patients heavily from any exposure. And I read some years ago that the last 50 years in Sweden, the allowed exposure to X-rays have been reduced by 60 million times. And this is interesting because that means that 50 years ago, 60 million times more was still regarded as safe. And then you can go to the non-ionizing situation today, where very, very, very high exposure levels are regarded as safe. But maybe if you call me in, let's say, 50 years' time, then we will have a similar reduction. And also, very interestingly, I remember, and that would be during the 1980s, when we started to take skin biopsies, and we collaborated together with histopathologists at the Department of Clinical Dermatology at the Karolinska Hospital. And one of them, he was an elderly gentleman, and he had seen skin biopsies from different categories being harmed by radionuclides like uranium, plutonium, radium, and so on. And when we saw dramatic increases in a cell type called mast cells, and they have nothing to do with telecom masts. It's a German name meaning a big bloated cell type, and they are the key cells for allergies, asthmas, and other oversensitivities. And when you looked in the skin of the electrohypersensitive persons, there was a dramatic increase of these cells. And then I remember that this man, he brought out a textbook showing photographs from skin biopsies from radiation damaged people. And now I'm talking about the ionizing radiation damaged. And it was just the same type of dramatic increases of mast cells. And they are one of the outmost portions of our immune system and should react in such a way. And suddenly they obviously reacted in the same way to non-ionizing radiation, and also being safe. They were from ordinary household television sets and from ordinary household computer screens, completely within the guidelines of public exposure, and still the cells in the body reacted in such a way. And I remember I received a very prestigious award for our studies. And at the ceremony, I said I shouldn't have it. It was this other doctor because he was before me. But he was very generous and said that I could keep it for my research. So I did. And we continued collaborating.
So there is not a difference really between ionizing radiation exposure symptoms and non-ionizing radiation
Well, I
exposure
would say that,
symptoms.
yeah, I would say there is one difference, and that's the time scale. If you play with radium or plutonium, you get the damages of your body within seconds. It would take minutes, maybe more, for exposure to X-ray and similar. And of course, for other types of ionizing radiation, including ultraviolet light, it may take an afternoon out in the sun to get the kind of symptoms that you attribute to exposure from non-ionizing radiation. And of course, I would say the shortest time spans for such reactions seems to be, well, at least 1 hour, and sometimes a whole day or even days, because before the persons get the symptoms. So that's the difference. But when you look, for instance, in the microscope, it looks the same. But one took a second or two, others take minutes, hours, or days to appear.
Is it reasonable then to say that we know with ionizing radiation exposure that we see thyroid cancer, leukemia, cataracts, cardiovascular disease, neurological decline, and immune dysfunction? And these, of course, are not unique to people who have been exposed to ionizing radiation. But is it unreasonable then to wonder how many of such things might be attributable in our population today to non-ionizing radiation?
Oh, I love that. I love that way of reasoning, and that's exactly how we have been discussing here in Stockholm too. That maybe within this group, as you say, of damages from ionizing radiation of various types, maybe you have a subset, and it could be small or medium or big, that is actually dependent on the everyday continuous 24/7 exposure to non-ionizing radiation. I mean, I sit here now, for instance, and I don't have, as you say, a mobile phone, but I'm still exposed from all the Wi-Fi routers from my neighbors, from the base stations in the telecom systems and so on. And when I do measurements in this room, and it's just an ordinary flat, there are colossal exposure levels that were not even invented 50 or 100 years ago. So this non-visible exposure is still there every day, 24/7, and maybe, as you say, it could be speculated that it contributes to other forms of identified exposure damage. And I would also say that after the early type of works, and there were a lot of other details, but that formed our working hypotheses that electron hypersensitivity and such persons, they are reacting in a very normal avoidance behavior, as you would, of course, if you get exposed. If maybe you can see that I've been out in the sun today, I'm a bit slightly reddish, and I keep myself out of it to not get sunburnt. And that's a normal avoidance reaction. And the person that doesn't have that kind of a reaction would be heavily sunburnt, of course, and damaged in the skin and also in deeper organs. And therefore, I have formulated the idea that maybe the electron hypersensitive persons, they are the new normal because they have an avoidance reaction to a potentially toxic environment, whereas people like myself who doesn't react to, as far as I know at least, to non-ionizing radiation like cell phone radiation, we are electrohyposensitive. We need to trim our immune system to react in a better way. And it doesn't yet. But maybe in the future there will be changes. And I mean, it has even been speculated that maybe in the future everyone will be electro hypersensitive, as we call them today.
Hypo and hypersensitivity. I think this is so interesting to discuss. In the animal kingdom, we would applaud a species' ability to discern danger and
Yeah.
therefore to do the only rational thing, which is to avoid it.
And
And
on top of that, you would have at least 1 or 2 hours of BBC with Sir David Attenborough talking about that particular species. And as you say, only in positive terms. But when it comes to electron hypersensitivity or human beings, as you know, there is often negativity, and these exposures cannot harm you. You must imagine this, and blah blah blah. And they're talking about Pavlovian conditioning and mass media driven psychosis and so on. And I should remind you that early we actually did experiments using instead rats, and they had exactly the same reactions in various organs as the electron hypersensitive persons. And of course, a rat doesn't read any newspapers or listen to radio or watch television and then think, oh, I'm probably a bit electro hypersensitive as well. So that kind of killed all this psychological nonsense. And also, I remember a colleague, and he was definitely not on my side. I have to stress that. Bengt Arnets, professor, he also investigated the psychological and psychiatric profile of electrohypersensitive persons, and that was done at the Uppsala University at the Department of Applied Psychology, and he arrived at the conclusion that they were actually above the general population when they came to normality. They were stronger in their psyche as compared to the average of the general population. And the only parameter they differed was the way they handle harassments. They were actually handling it better. They were stronger. And that's the way, when you start kicking your dog, which is forbidden, I would say, in Sweden at least, then after a while, the dog will accept it and even wait for the next kick. That's the way you handle harassments. And that's what he saw with electrohypersensitive people, that they were stronger. A person like me, much earlier, would have burst into tears and said, no, please stop it.
Perhaps it's even a superior immune system among those who are electrohypersensitive. At least that argument might be made.
Yeah.
But
And I agree. That's definitely a very interesting working hypothesis. And when you look, and I should also mention, parallel to the early studies on so-called mast cells containing heparin and histamine and a lot of other bioactive molecules, we also had a cell type called the dendritic cells, because they look like trees. And they are really the outmost portion of the immune system. And when you looked in the skin of the electrohypersensitive people compared to normal healthy volunteers, oh wow, it's like a palisade, a barricade of such cells looking out towards the universe, basically, the surrounding environment. So it seemed as if their skin and probably bodily organs had been activated. The army really stood waiting for the attack. And I remember I had a clinical colleague who saw photographs from our microscopic studies, and he was very impressed by this. And he said, this could be an activation of the entire immune system. At that time, I was, well, too young, or what you should say, So I really didn't really connect the dots.
and that makes me think. So considering this idea of hypo and hyper sensitivity, I don't know how this would ever be proven, but it may be interesting for conversation. I know that Arthur Furstenberg, in his book, talked about the fact that in 1889, which is when we began stringing these very long antennas across the face of the earth, we call them power lines, and broadcasting music that had never been heard before, this 60 cycle or 50 cycle electric and magnetic fields.
Yep.
That there was an influenza pandemic, and it lasted for 4 years, and at least 1 million people perished from this. And people may say, well, what does that have to do anything? That's the flu, that's influenza. But then also discussed in the book is the meaning of influenza, is influence of the stars, and it's been known for some time that prior to stretching those long antennas across the face of the earth, we call power lines, and broadcasting these synthetic frequencies, really influenza came and went according to the solar maximum, which would then create a difference in the natural magnetic fields that we would experience. So am I saying what I'm saying is correct so far? And then I'd like to continue and ask a question.
Well, it is correct, definitely. And it's a very interesting power line of discussion, I would call it, So, yes.
So let's imagine for just a moment that those people who died were among the group of people that were more sensitive than others. And so
Yes.
I note
Yeah,
that
or the opposite.
ah
They could have been the normal, healthy people, and not the hypersensitive persons that maybe had an immune system, the latter one, that were more capable of dealing with both viral and bacterial attacks. And also, they were sort of more accustomed to that kind of exposure situations. And also, finally, maybe they had at the time avoidance reactions, which we today might say, oh, we need to study it because we don't really know what happened at the time. But a parallel line of proof is that when I talk to beekeepers, they always tell me you cannot have beehives under power lines because that will deteriorate the production volume and quality of honey and honeycombs and so on. And, when people tell me things like that, I go, what? Does our prime minister know this? And the electricity companies? And they don't, of course, but every beekeeper, they know it. So they keep their hives away from the power lines.
yes, and in the Isle of Wight, we had the first colony collapse disorder among the honeybees when uh, RF, or radio frequency radiation, began coming from that area from transmitters.
Yeah,
And they long ago, people argue that it's the variola mite, for example. Well, way back when this first happened, they
yeah,
investigated the variola mite, and certainly those aren't helpful to the bee's physiology, but it's sort of a known thing, and a bee can live with those, not as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
can live with them. And
yeah,
so they determined at that time, I guess this would have been 100 years ago, maybe over 100 years ago, that, and it can't be proven, okay? It's a correlation, but it's interesting. So where I was headed with this idea of hypo and hyper was then also what we have seen is, in Dr. Samuel Milham's book, where he took an epidemiological view of the rollout of the power lines and the disease of modern civilization. And then Arthur Furstenberg was careful to document what happened with shortwave radio when that began using in common use around the time of what was then called the Spanish flu, and then
yeah.
excess deaths when the first satellites went up, and so on. And then I was going to ask the question, well, we can't really know. You've pointed out that it may be an inferior immune system, or it might be a superior immune system, but if it were that the sensitive ones were the ones that were dying off,
Yeah.
then it would argue very strongly that we won't have any in the future because of the unlimited growth of these
Yeah,
fields.
I agree. Or the opposite, because when I give lectures, I often point to that maybe the future will hold survivors, which we today would call them hypersensitive, because they will avoid the exposure situations. They will not buy any Wi-Fi routers or cell phones and so on, and they will keep away from any antenna installations, etc., as will very, very poor people around the world who cannot afford to buy a cell phone or even buy the infrastructure to build a cell phone system. And we will pity them today, but maybe in a 50 or 100 years' time, they will be standing as the last man standing in the Western, with smoking gun barrels. But maybe they will be the ones that actually survive, because the rest of us, we will have the irradiation wherever we are, wherever we go to school or work or so on, and we will not see the train coming. And for instance, myself, I don't have any reactions to any form of non-ionizing radiation. Uh, so therefore, I'm, of course, being irradiated wherever I am.
Right. So in 100 years, we'll get together again and we'll
Yeah, of course, you have to call me then, you know.
we'll know the
But you know,
answer.
let's stick to this for a second, because there are a few papers pointing to, just as a working hypothesis, that maybe the build out of 5G systems and occurrence, first in Wuhan in China and later on all over the world, of COVID-19 might have something to do with each other. And don't forget also, and that's very well documented, that bacteria that are irradiated either by cell phone radiation or Wi-Fi router radiation, they will become antibiotic resistant. And when the World Health Organization was asked during the pandemic if COVID-19 is the worst threat to mankind, then the official representative of the World Health Organization in Geneva, in Switzerland, he said that no, we can cope with that, you know. But the reporter was very persistent and said, well, what is then the worst threat health wise to mankind? And then the guy said, well, that's easy to answer. That's antibiotic resistance in healthcare. If you call me 100 years' time, maybe there will be no one picking up, because it was pointed out in 2017, it was, that by the year 2050, then in the order of 10 million people around the world will die prematurely because of antibiotic resistance. But the problem is that they didn't take into account the exposure effect on bacteria. So if you point these two facts together, both the radiation effect and the antibiotic resistance, maybe the 10 million by the time will be 8.2 billion people. It
Yeah.
could be the end of everything, you know. Except then people that might be living far away. I heard some years ago, for instance, that people in Patagonia, in the very southern tip of South America, they live very primitively and very isolatedly, and maybe they will be able to sustain human life and restart the whole project of mankind, you know, and maybe some other groups as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Humans have lost abilities over the last generations. We used to have the ability to navigate over featureless landscapes for
Oh
long
yeah, yeah,
distances.
yeah.
And
And you remember that such features, they were always attributed, for instance, in indigenous tribes, to certain persons that were the navigators, and maybe they were the electron hypersensitive, as we call them today, and they had a sensory system very different to the rest of the tribe, so they could really maneuver, and as you know, over enormous distances, like 5,000 nautical miles from some of the Polynesian islands to Hawaii, and going dead on, you know. They didn't miss it, they just went there. And today we need a lot of instrumentation, GPS satellites and so on, to even find our way to the tobacconist.
you're
So,
right.
yeah, I mean, it's crazy, you know. I mean, people are so lost sometimes.
Yes, yes. And featureless landscapes other than on the water as well. So desert areas,
Oh,
including
yeah. Oh,
including
yeah.
the Arctic, where it's really
Yeah, yeah.
featureless,
Yeah.
and they're able
Yeah.
to navigate, and it wasn't based on compass, because the closer you get to the North Pole, the less help a compass would be.
Yeah, and you know, when the American Marines investigated in the macro and micro Polynesia these abilities to navigate the waters, what they also found was that these natural tribes living there, they didn't even understand concepts like nautical charts, north, south, west, east, compasses, and so on. They were not even in their vocabulary, but still they knew, using these navigators in each tribe, how to make way to a certain island somewhere.
and their lives depended on it. And my
Oh
only
yeah, of course.
yeah, my only point is we are shedding human abilities.
And may I go back also? I have in my head spinning the word tinnitus because you mentioned it earlier during our discussion. And you might recall that when we investigated electrohypersensitive persons and they were free to give any symptoms of their choice, then it turned out the only choice everyone, and it was only like 25 or something, but it's still everyone reported tinnitus. And sometimes, when I sit here alone, I think about, for instance, birds. If they could talk, would they tell us that they suffer from tinnitus? All of them?
Yes.
And the dogs, the cats, the spiders, and so on, how and therefore I get sometimes a bit irritated because, as you know, some people they only talk about humans as if we were the only species on the planet, but there are 8.7 million known species more. And what happens with all of them, and who is taking responsibility?
Yeah, I have a friend who used to be a coach driver in Spain, and so he would drive hundreds of kilometers, and every 100 kilometers he would have to stop the coach and go out and just scrub the windshield because
Oh
there would
yeah.
be so many insects.
Oh right, yeah.
And so towards the end of his career, he didn't have to stop anymore.
No.
And of course,
I mean,
there's
that development you see everywhere, here in Sweden as well, and in a scary proportion, I would say. And still, Sweden and Europe, we have managed pretty well. We have lost when we talk about the classical pollinators like honeybees, bumblebees, and so on. We have only lost in the order of 75%. But as you know, for United States, it's more than 90%. Canada, the same, and other countries around the world have dramatic losses as well. And one simple thing to do, as you say, is to check your windshield and see how many smashed insects you have after 100 kilometers. And today there are very few of them. And we had a discussion yesterday because the man said, no, 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 that's because the cars today are aerodynamic. And I said, that's a fair point, but I showed him a few pictures of Swedish train engines that are like boxes on wheels. So they have a front that is completely against the travel direction. And in the 50s and 60s, the front would be black. Today, there are single smashed insects, so there is a strong reduction. And also here in Sweden, the last half year, the World Wildlife Fund in Sweden have had big billboard ads telling people, please plant flowers and bushes, trees that these insects like. So they try to swing the development around, but it doesn't make any big difference, I wouldn't say. And a few days ago, a thing happened which I have warned for well, many, many years. Um, if you lose pollinators, then the farmers cannot grow a lot of different crops, fruits, vegetables, and so on. And since a farmer is a business person, they need to change their focus. And that means that they will grow cereals like wheat, barley, rye, and so on. And that has happened here in Sweden. And when the farmers start growing a lot of these, the volume increases, and then, of course, the prices will go down. And a few days ago, in the biggest Swedish newspaper, front page, the price going down so much now, so farmers are put out of possibility to earn an income. They have tons and tons and tons of cereals, but the price is so low, so they could just as well just burn it.
yes, and then we have the opportunity to lose all of that
Yeah, yeah,
that diversity of species, which may
yeah.
be correlated very well with health. in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah, exactly.
getting a balanced diet.
And yeah, and you know about this fantastic photograph from the United States. It's a big food store, and they have taken a photo where you see all these fantastic fruits, vegetables, nuts, and so on, and then they remove all the things that are dependent on pollinators, like honeybees, and the store is basically empty. There is potatoes and some other things left. Um, but that's it.
Yeah, and I think it takes much less. Radio frequency radiation is the thing most often quoted to me as the big problem, but I think it takes much less than people might imagine. And the reason I say that is because I live in a relatively pristine area in the mountains. We have a lot of terrain here. As I say, we're about 40 miles from the Canadian border, and very low population, relatively speaking, 1,851 square miles, and less than 100,000 people. And so the peak RF radiation in this area is less than 5 microwatts per
Yeah.
square meter, and yet,
Oh, that's very good.
and
Yeah.
yet, I've lived here a long time, and 25 years ago, if you had clover in your lawn, you would have a carpet of bees, honeybees,
Of
and
course. Yeah, of course.
all of the flowers would have honeybees. And last
Yeah.
year, I counted my first bee at the end of August, and I looked every day.
Oh, wow.
And I saw maybe, I can't say if I saw the same bee again and again, but maybe 10 bees I counted that season.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
been a little bit better this year, but just dramatic change. So we need to
Well,
beware.
it's a colossal reduction, and I read a lot of newspaper articles from the United States, various areas, and they report more than 90%. And maybe I told you another time, I had a letter from a friend in Canada, an old man. Unfortunately, he has passed away since then, but he asked me why all the birds in his garden had disappeared. And I said, I don't know. But if you send me a list of the birds that you are missing, maybe I could come up with some idea. And he sent me the list, and I returned an email to him and said, oh, this is very easy to answer. All these birds that you mentioned are insect eaters. There are no insects left in Canada, so there is nothing to eat. No birds. They are gone. And he was very sorry. Yeah, because and the list, they were sort of regular birds, but he missed them, of course. And his garden was silent. No singing, no fluttering, nothing.
Yeah. So you mentioned silent. There's a famous book, of course, Silent Spring, and it was talking about the effects of the chemical paradigm,
Yeah, yeah,
insecticides. And then
yeah,
years later was written an electronic Silent Spring, and it was talking
yeah,
about the electromagnetic, I think primarily the radio frequency exposures.
yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, please let me know. I think there are patents for using radio frequency radiation as a pesticide.
Of course, yes, yes. And that has been known for quite some time. And also, I read an article from the field of DNA research, investigating our genes and the molecule behind that. And then they reported a non invasive, non heating way to split this DNA molecule by using cell phone radiation. So,
Right. Right.
and no one says, what is going on? Wait, every cell in my body has DNA, and I have a cell phone to my head or in my hand. What does that mean? And so, and I, when I go in the Stockholm Underground, I'm always fascinated because it's packed with adults, and most of them are parents. And why are they not standing up and screaming in horror? Because there are so many things going on that they should react to. And if we, for instance, cannot grow a lot of the vegetables, fruits, nuts, and so on, should the kids only eat bread in the future?
Yes.
Um,
So this is a very interesting line of discussion, I think. I have spent, I'm sensitive myself. And what really saved me was this awareness of what it might be. And so I cleaned up my house, and I went to dramatic lengths to have 10,000 times less RF radiation in my home than what I just mentioned. And
yeah.
so things began falling away. Chronic arthritis went away, cardiac dysrhythmia went away, this constantly being locked in sympathetic nervous system imbalance. Tinnitus did not go away,
Okay.
but all these other things, everything else, and I could add another 4 or 5 things, those all went away completely, unexpectedly, when I began living in a pristine environment. And so I had a lot of time because I was so acutely ill that I couldn't work any longer. So I had some long years of time to contemplate. Why don't people understand this?
Yeah, yeah.
Why are people unwilling to understand this? And not just, the synthetic fields, but there are other things going on in the world today. And so I know this has not been your area of study. This is more social science or psychology or whatever, but nevertheless, I know you have had interesting conversations with people on subway trains, and
Yep.
you've been successful in educating some of them, even though they didn't want to talk about it at first.
Yeah.
But would you like to share a thought or two about this time that we're living in, and why, when there's so much information specifically about synthetic field harm, and
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
mentioned DNA damage last time, we talked about blood-brain barrier and reproductive harm and many other things. Why is it that do you think people are uninterested in listening?
Well, that's a brilliant question. Let me first start with your experiences by reducing exposure, because I like that very much. And many years ago, we suggested that we should be allowed to use a small town in Sweden and remove all the exposure. They would have shielded, wired information coming to their computers and radio and televisions and so on, but no airborne radiation exposure. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to do this experiment, but right now, together with a lady in Denmark, Elizabeth Copeland, we are trying to find support, interest, and money to pursue such a study. And our idea was very simple. We didn't want to investigate electro-hypersensitive people, but we wanted to see if you have a normal, healthy population, and of course, they would carry things with them like diabetes, psoriasis, and so on, breaking a bone and whatnot. But we would like to see, when we interview them over time, would the healthy ones actually become healthier? Um, and maybe we have now not only dumbed down the population by constantly only looking into these black mirrors, but maybe we have also suppressed the health level, and they still feel sort of all right. But you remember times when you were really feeling good, and maybe we could bring them back. Unfortunately, the study we wanted to do, let's say 20, 30 years ago, was turned down, and the authorities said it was not ethical to do it that way. And for me, trying to make people feel better, isn't that the highest level of moral ethics? So
Yeah.
I never understood. the credit says. I never understood it. It was very, very odd. But now maybe we can revake this experiment, and maybe humans are not the best to use, but we are aiming together with a colleague in Switzerland, Daniel Favre, to maybe use honeybees and beehives in the same manner, trying to see if we expose them, will their health go down? If we remove the exposure, will it be restored and even maybe going up to normal levels again, and playing a little bit around that? But we need the economic muscles to be able to do it, and we are trying our best, of course. And then about the information and education, I love what you do. Because I could tell you, and don't tell your viewers and listeners, but the previous interview, wow, so many people have written to me, and not telling me that I'm good, but telling me that you are good,
Oh,
because they like the way, they like the way you approach the matters in a calm, composed, cool way, as the young people say, and fact based, and allowing for speculations, hypotheses, theories, facts, knowledge to be blended and be drawn conclusions based on that. And also, they felt that you would like to act before it is too late. And right now, we are in this technocracy running towards hopefully a bright future, or a very, very dark wall of stone, which will crush us. And of course, I hope to be wrong, and see the bright future instead. But I also would like to be a bit cautious. And we often talk in, political terms about precautionary measures and so on. And I think this is an area where we really should having precautionary principles and measures. And right now we don't. We don't see that at all. And also, I always encourage people. I mean, like today, I've done it several times around Stockholm, walking, talking to people, seeing them in buses, trams, underground, and so on. Open a discussion about this and ask them if they feel comfortable knowing, for instance, that the World Health Organization has cancer classified these safe exposures, both the power frequent magnetic fields in connection with childhood leukemia, but also all types of radio frequent fields in connections to certain type of brain tumors. Um, Both of these types are rare. I mean, they are not very common, but that's not the comfort to a person that sees his child dying in childhood leukemia, or a person that has contracted a brain tumor. So we need to be up on our toes and try to investigate this. But well, you hit me actually at the bad time in my life, because I'm feeling sad. At least in Sweden, people are, well, I mean, they say it's interesting what I tell them, but when I take my little hand and say, well, could you put $1 here so we could investigate this? No. Then they're gone. They're not interested at all. So I kind of speak for deaf ears, but I still continue speaking because I believe in UKIF and in the type of education and information, and it could start the snowball rolling down, picking up speed, and you plant seeds, they will grow, and hopefully they will grow fast enough so it's not a too late reaction to something that you saw coming actually years and years ago. So, well, keep our hands, and pray for something.
I was going to mention this at the end. I will mention this at the end, but I'm going to mention it here as well. I would just say for people who are listening still to this conversation that we're having, so much of the information that's free
Yeah.
wasn't really free to produce. And you
No.
know what? In the world today, it is the rare person who is willing to learn about synthetic field exposures and to take a precautionary approach on behalf of themselves, on behalf of their loved ones. And so research.radiation.dk, research.radiation.d like Delta, key like kilo. Check that out. This is a way that we can continue to fund the work of our great friend in this, who has published, is it 800?
Well, I actually lost track. I'm sorry for that,
Oh
but
my gosh.
8 or 900 or 1,000, I have lost track. I'm sorry, but it's a lot. And I continued publishing. Just a few weeks ago, we published a study with these honeybees in Switzerland, where we removed the Schumann resonances, the natural background electromagnetic fields, and then, among many things, the queens stop producing fertilized eggs. So you see, there is more than the varroa mites to this story. There's a lot we need to know and understand. And also, I would like to say that if people listening and looking at this interview don't want to give any money, they could still go to this website and read about what we have done, and also read about what we want to do. It's shortly summarized. And also, there are a number of different YouTube based interviews and videos and so on. So they can educate themselves and their loved ones and their colleagues and workmates and whatever. And they could also inform themselves about both the old results as well as the more current studies that are going on or hopefully will be started.
I had a great conversation a little while ago. I haven't published it yet with Pavel Wypichowski. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know.
Oh, yeah, I
He's,
do. Yes.
yeah, electrical engineer in Poland. And because my background is in engineering, and I have a lifetime of experience with wireless communication, ham radio, and I built a transmitter when I was a child where I could transmit my voice on a reflected beam of sunlight to a
Okay.
receiver.
Oh, I love
So
that.
it might have been the only way to wirelessly transmit information without damage. I'm not sure, but anyway,
Yeah.
I think in those ways. I think in terms of engineering ideas, and I've always thought that it's that success in this area is going to be a combination of excluding the synthetic fields and embracing the natural fields. So you mentioned
Yeah.
the study that you just published with regard to the honeybees, and they can't be isolated from the Schumann resonances. And the way Pavel put it, I love it, is he says this problem is one of signal to noise. And not everybody understands what signal to noise ratio is, but it's basically the ability to pick out what you're trying to listen to in a noisy environment. So I think that's interesting.
I agree with him. But I have a question for you as well, going back to what you told me a few minutes ago about your own living situation and that the field strength is very low. Would you agree that your neighbors, not you, but your neighbors, that probably all have a mobile phone and a wireless laptop and a Wi-Fi and so on, um, because the distance to the base stations being very long, then their gadgets, like the cell phone, needs to upgrade their output power. So locally, within their living room or kitchen, they will be much more exposed from their own gadgets than living in a city. Would that be what you would say?
Yes. So two parts to this. One is with regard to my personal exposure. My nearest neighbor is 200 meters from me, so it doesn't affect us so much when we're in the garden or whatever.
No?
But for all of my neighbors, yeah, of course, their cell
Yeah.
phone
Yeah.
automatically adjusts the power level without any user intervention at all. So if they
yeah,
choose to use the wireless phones, they're going to be exposed to colossal increase in synthetic
yeah.
field exposure.
And this is often a discussion matter between myself and people that are campaigning, they are activists, they want to remove the antenna installation, put it further away. Um, and then I say, well, is that really what you want if you have like a cell phone yourself, which most unfortunately have? Because then, as you say, upgrading the output power, much more exposure. Shouldn't you instead take the base station, the antenna, closer to yourself? And they don't have these technical details ready for themselves, so they don't understand.
Yeah, we have.
And
I'm
I
sorry.
mean, a guy like you should make some kind of short technical advisory concepts and publishing them under the headline, "This is how your cell phone actually works." And they are always surprised, and they don't trust me initially and say, "No, no, no, you are wrong." No, I'm not wrong. I will send you some pages from the internet and you can read for yourself. And then they come back and say, "Yeah, you were right." So,
This is such an important point that you just brought up, and we have a local advocacy group that thinks the answer is that we will limit the amount of power that can come from the phone masts,
yeah,
and then that way nobody will be exposed to more than just a very tiny, tiny amount. But
yeah,
what they don't realize is that that means a multitude of masts, a
yeah,
multitude of
yeah,
sources. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
what you've lost in terms of intensity of exposure, you've more than made up for in terms of the number of sources. And
yeah,
that we talked before briefly about, I think the name is Belyaev, and he showed how incredibly infinitesimal amount of radio frequency radiation exposure could alter bacteria
yeah,
genetically.
yeah,
And there, we don't even have meters,
no,
that go down that low. And
no,
I frankly would question how many labs in the world could maintain levels that low, particularly as you consider power frequent exposures and lighting
yeah,
exposures that also
yeah.
have the opportunity to introduce fields. But
And
yeah,
when laboratories do experiments at a very, very low exposure level, compared to natural background, that very, very low exposure level is still colossal,
it's infinite.
because the natural background, oh, that's small. And therefore, you get gaps between natural background for the third generation mobile telephony, 3G, and the allowed public exposure. And the gap is actually a quintillion times. That's a 1 with 18 zeros behind. So even if you lower to what you think is a low exposure compared to the natural background, it's still colossal. And again, when you tell people this, they haven't understood it. And why should they have understood it? This is really technical details and details of physics, radio physics, and so on. It's not so easy to learn automatically.
And people too have a difficulty in really understanding that there is nothing on Earth
I
like
know.
uh,
Yeah.
a radio frequency emanation that carries information in it,
Yeah.
because the natural fields, and there are natural fields now, they're 18 zeros, 1/8 number with 18 zeros times less
Yeah.
than our current synthetic exposures, but they're
Yeah.
fundamentally different in at
Yeah.
least coherence and
Yeah.
polarization,
And yeah, exactly.
phase. Yeah,
And, and pulsation and so on. And that means that maybe the interval difference may be infinite.
infinite. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it isn't a matter of. I mean, it's an infinite increase. It's never
Yeah.
existed before.
Yeah. And to me, that is kind of scary, because again, I cannot help myself seeing and thinking about the other 8.7 million species. I mean, if humans are going down, that would be one thing, sad. But if we also take a lot of other species with us, that would be much, much more bitter and disappointing. And as you know, when, for instance, the World Wildlife Fund has counted the members, the individuals of each species, there's an enormous loss on this planet. And I see regularly headlines like life on the planet is in jeopardy. And again, people in the underground in Stockholm, Sweden, why are they not screaming in horror, but also saying, "Oh, I want to help you. We need to investigate this now." And I have no answer to that.
Yeah, or even if you do this, you can reduce your personal exposure, and they
Yeah,
say, "Oh,
yeah, yeah.
that's too much." So I asked you a little while ago what you think it is that keeps people from being able to understand. I don't know. I don't know what
No,
the
I
answer
don't know
is.
either. No,
But
I don't know either.
you're
So,
such a brilliant scientist. You spent your whole career on
oh,
this, and
thank you. Yeah.
I like to
And,
either.
I say again, I'm a very plain person. And I talk to anyone, and I really mean anyone all over the world. I try to communicate knowledge, educate, inform, and in such a way so it should be easy to digest, easy to understand. And people are interested and they could be shocked and so on, but it doesn't really change them. They continue with their lives as if this doesn't exist. And maybe this is a way to be sane instead of insane, that you turn away from threats. And I'm fascinated because we spend a lot of time, for instance, in cinema theaters, looking at Hollywood movies with incoming comets or asteroids or volcano eruptions and threatening life on the planet. But you don't see any movies about this. And maybe Hollywood needs to make one or two.
Yeah, and maybe it has something to do with the continuing, seemingly never-ending chain of traumatic exposures
Yeah,
that
yeah, that's a
people are
good
giving.
point.
So
Yeah,
you and I are discussing a real possibility of ending life on Earth.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't like to make hyperbolic statements, but really we're talking about the ability to end life for a species,
Well,
maybe all life.
especially when you take into account all the research, for instance, on non-ionizing radiation and impact on sperm cells and fertility. I
Yes, so
mean,
let's change our focus here, and there are a couple of things I wanted to talk to you in detail about,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and this is one of them is the reproductive capacity. So our reproductive capacity, I'm told, has gone down by 50% over the
yeah.
last 50 years. The implication of this is usually tried to place on chemicals and whatnot, but there is something beyond biochemistry. There's biophysics.
Yeah.
And so let's talk in detail about all the potential for reproductive harm if we could. And I want
Well,
to
I
talk
mean,
both about the damage to sperm cells, as well as to the eggs. And
yeah,
men obviously can recover their capacity to generate new sperm cells,
yeah.
but women, once they reach an age of maturity, not. So please.
Yeah, and I mean, to begin with, I like to always visit reality when I start a line of research, and here the reality, as you say, points to a dramatic reduction in sperm cell count, motility, quality, morphology, and so on. And that is well known all over the world that the sperm cell quality has plummeted. As you say, also egg cells in women are at jeopardy, and the combination means a reduction in fertility. But then on top of this, you have all the what I would call societal or behavioral reduction factors. I have seen a number of documentaries from Japan, for instance, where young men and women basically don't meet because they are occupied all the time with gaming, surfing, and using all these gadgets. And they stay indoors, they don't even go out. And of course, if they don't, they can't meet. And they are in a very serious situation in Japan regarding their population, which is now being reduced in number. And the question is, of course, what is driving this? And my little contribution could be then studies have been done on test tubes with sperm cells, and ordinary cell phone radiation exposure will harm them. So a sperm cell should not go to a shop and buy a cell phone. That's the result. And they are, of course, exposed very much because a man would keep automatically his cell phone close to his genitals, either in a pocket or in his hand or at the waistline or something, and he would sit there using it, and so they would be maximally exposed. And apart from the spermatogonia, the precursor cells, they also contain the same type as dendritic cells, as I mentioned, for the skin. And if they react in the skin, most likely they have reacted also in the testicles, and we don't know what that actually means. If these very strong immune competent cells would, in an autoimmune reaction, attack the spermatogonia, that would lead to a reduction in number and quality and motility. So it could be a very simple chain of reactions. But, and this is in my website, this is one of the projects we would like to pursue, because I feel that the published data very interesting, but there are questions. So I would like to remake or replicate these studies, but in much tougher, standardized and controlled formats, keeping a close eye on all the variation factors. But again, without the money, we can't do it really. And this is very interesting because we talked about before that you should call me in 100 years' time. The problem could be that in 100 years' time, there will be very few people left to call or use a cell phone whatsoever, if this dramatic decline in birth rate continues. And we don't know yet what will happen. How should we say? The good news is that Africa as a continent, they are producing a lot of babies. So maybe everyone in the future will be an African. And so be it then, of course. And they are often not living at such exposure situation as we do in the Western world. But that could change because African countries, they are now increasing their economy. They are looking at the Western type of lifestyles. They want to have wireless communication, cell phones, wireless laptops, Wi-Fi, and so on. So let's see what happens there. It's like a full-scale experiment. But in the meantime, wow, we would love to do these type of control experiments. And with all due respect, in contrast to egg cells from women, sperm cells are very easily retrieved. I say more, no more.
Yes, right.
So yeah, so it's a very simple setup. You just need a bunch of men, and they would be very happy to help you. And test tubes and exposures and see what's going on.
Yeah, because you can just observe and see how many of the sperm are living and how many are dead
Yeah,
inside
yeah,
of an area in the microscope
yeah,
where you have
yeah,
lines,
exactly.
denoted, so a certain square area, and then you can look
Yeah,
at whether they are misshapen or not, and whether they're good swimmers, to put it
yeah.
frankly, or not.
And for many, many years, every year, I wrote to a friend and colleague, at Karolinska Hospital, and they have one of these reproductive units that belong to the World Health Organization. And I said, please, couldn't you allow us to come and do some exposure studies with cell phones? And he was always saying, no, there is not any problems. They are safe. And the years pass by, but I continue sending my emails to him, you know. And then some years ago, let's say maybe 5 years ago, I saw a newspaper article in the biggest Swedish newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, the daily news, and he was interviewed. And he was asked, why are the sperm cells going down around the world? And he gave all the classical factors with chemical exposures, insecticides, pesticides, stress, blah, blah, blah. And for the first time, he mentioned that maybe cell phone radiation could be a factor.
Oh my, that's great.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. After all these years, he mentioned it as a possibility. And now, unfortunately, I'm retired, and well, it's both unfortunately and fortunately, but being retired in Sweden at least makes it very difficult to apply for funding from, for instance, governmental sources. They will ask, which university do you belong to? No, I'm retired. Oh, then we cannot give any money. So we are still standing there like horses at the starting line. We want to run away, but no, we can't. We are held back all the
Yeah.
time.
Is there a rodent study that you're aware of that shows that normal exposure, well, what's considered to be normal exposure to radio frequency radiation to mice or rats or some such thing, by the time you get to so many generations, you have complete sterility?
Yes, I do know about such a study. It's from Greece. And there were two scientists that were summoned by, I think, their government even, because they had seen among the Greek population of human beings that there was an increasing deterioration of health, various parameters. And they asked these two scientists if they please could investigate what was going on in Greece. And they chose a medium-sized town and started, and they were very detailed. They investigated everything, and asking people, interviewing them. They took different tests and so on. And at the end of this pretty big investigation, they hadn't really found anything that could explain this increased deterioration of the human health. And then I heard an interview. They said that, well, one afternoon we stood on the town square and we looked around, and Greece contains a lot of mountains that are rather steep going up and down, and when they stood there, they saw what is called an antenna park on top of one of the ridges. And there were different antennas for cell phone communication, for radio, for television, and so on. And for practical reasons, you keep them together. You only have one road up there, one power line, and so on. It's very practical to do it that way. And then they stood there and thought, these antennas, could they have an impact on the human health? And I think they were like 2 kilometers away or something like that. They were quite far away, and it's easier than to use mice. And they studied the fertility parameters, and they looked at the first generation of children or babies, pups, and the second, the third, the fourth, and they didn't see anything really. But then they decided, and at that time I could tell you they had a lot of mice because they had produced a lot of litter. But they decided to look yet another time. And then it turned out that by the fifth generation, the fertility had suddenly gone down practically to zero. And if you transform that to the human beings, not the mice, but the human beings, both in Greece, in the United States, and in Sweden, it could mean that in 150 to 200 years' time, young people cannot get babies any longer because of something we did already during the 1990s. And then, of course, it's too late to call back like to 2025 and say, hey, please, could you stop exposing people and animals? Please stop it. They cannot do it. It's too late. We are all dead then, of course. But the future generations will stand at a very, very dark wall, realizing that we cannot get any children any longer.
So this is just not a an issue that can be put aside. There's a
No,
lot
no.
of there's a lot at
Yeah.
stake here, and
Yeah, of course. And I also remember it was published in, should we call it, wireless industry friendly scientific journal, Bioelectromagnetics. And the editor at the time, he told me that when he got this manuscript, and an editor will then make copies and send to anonymous colleagues called referees, and they will read the manuscript and either say yes, it's good, or well, they need to add a few things, or no, it's not good at all. And they all said, no, this is very good, it's very interesting, you should publish it. But as an editor, he felt very insecure. So he decided to do something called double refereeing, meaning he made another 5 copies and sent to another 5 colleagues, asking them, please, you have to look at this. There's something fishy here. This cannot be right. And these new 5 colleagues, they read it and they sent back their comments, and they were all, oh, this is very well done, very interesting, you have to publish it. And then he did it. He did publish the study. It's interesting because I worked my whole life at the Karolinska Institute and the Royal Institute of Technology, and they are associated with the handing out of Nobel Prizes in physiology or medicine, chemistry, and physics. And so-called double refereeing is rather common among Nobel laureate awarded findings, but very, very, very uncommon among ordinary science contributions. I'm not saying that these 2 guys will get the Nobel Prize. That's not what I say. But the authors, Magras and Senos, definitely drew attention. And later on, this was followed up by studies in test tube environments, as I said before, with sperm cells being exposed to cell phone radiation and so on. So a lot of pieces in this jigsaw puzzle fits together. And I agree with you, Keith. This is definitely not you can turn your back on. And the question is actually, I mean, if I was the, well, what should we call it? The world leader, I would say to everyone, please, we need to turn everything off until we can establish that these exposures really are safe. And now we talk about the future for mankind. Don't forget all the other species, but also all the other facets. We talked about antibiotic resistance, we talked about the immune system activations, and so on, blood-brain barrier leakage, etc., 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 DNA damage. There are so many pretty serious effects that have been demonstrated both in laboratories but very often also already in reality. It's already here, it's already happening.
so this
And
yeah.
still people don't do anything. I was just oh, that's That's around 10 days ago. I met a lot of farmers in Sweden. We talked about the effect on the pollinators, and they are very well informed about that. Their choice to grow like barley, wheat, rye, and so on, and the increase in volume, decrease in price, all of this they knew about, and still no real reaction.
Yeah. So this is my, I would say my number one concern is for the future generations. And
Yeah,
there's also a potential issue with the health of future
yeah, of
generations
course.
that
Yeah, of course.
we can't dismiss. So
No.
you happen to be a neuroscientist, and so you've not only spent your career largely on this issue of synthetic field exposures, but you have a doctorate in, is it neuroscience, or you can correct me on
No,
the
that's correct. It's basic and applied neuroscience. So I know a little bit about the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves out in the body.
So if I could
Uh,
say, yeah, let me say a couple of things to kick this off, and then I want to learn from you. So with regard to then children who are actually born, so they've had these synthetic field exposures, and yet they've managed to be born. There are studies that have shown, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that synthetic field exposures that are considered today to be normal um, can result in mice with what looks like ADHD, for example. And so
yeah, yeah.
the question then is, we're not to experiment on humans, of course, but then can we expect that there might be issues? And I want to say one other thing before I turn it over to you is, we have this testing all over the world, and governments all over the world are saying, okay, this is the guideline for exposures to, for example, radio frequency radiation. And one country will be 10 times lower than another country. But when you're talking about a number that has 16 zeros and taking 1 zero off, for 10 times one way or another, and then particularly if you consider the fact that there is no known safe level
Yeah.
Of exposure, the hygienic levels that we talked about before, and then there seems to be a lot going on in the brain. You got a certain kind of metabolism and heat dissipation characteristics. You're bathed in this cerebral spinal fluid. You have this mysterious blood-brain barrier. And then you have the development of gray matter and white matter and all of these different things. And then supposedly all you need is a plastic head, bigger than women and children and bigger than most men's head. And you fill it up with a certain liquid, and then you see whether the temperature of that liquid goes up more than a certain amount of time, degrees in a certain amount of time. And then that's what you use to say whether, for example, a cell phone is considered to be safe or not.
Yeah.
And so
Correct.
trying to characterize all of that infinite complexity of what's going on in the brain with a giant plastic head bigger than the average person's head and filled with liquid, to me seems like it might be missing some of the important issues, and so never mind. We're told that it's only the thermal effects that are of importance at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet the test itself allows for heating.
Yeah.
A certain amount of heating in a very short
Yeah.
period of time.
Yeah.
So, okay, with all of that,
yeah.
I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, I mean, you are such a gentleman. I would be much more Swedishly blunt and bold and say that kind of testing is stupid nonsense. Because what you do then, you have this phantom head, plastic, fluid filled, you don't even measure the temperature increase. It is calculated. So it's not even measured because I guess they don't dare to measure it. And the phantom is allowed to live in a completely, I want to stress that, completely radiation free environment. Where do you find that in the real world? And this phantom head is allowed to make one single phone call, 6, 10, or 30 minutes long, and never again. And based upon this, they calculate what happens over a lifetime, which is, of course, complete nonsense. And therefore, very early, many scientists, not only myself, but others as well, pointed to that this is not the way you can calculate any form of human exposure guidelines. Even the head, of the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, Paolo Vecchia, at a meeting in London 2008, stood up and said that this specific absorption rate value was never meant to be used in biology or medicine. There were others that picked up on it. It's just a technical measure, and then it works perfectly well because you need to, for instance, study an antenna installation in an aircraft, and that's his perfect way to calculate the interference from exposure, outdoor exposures with this antenna. Then you can use the SAR value, the specific absorption rate. You can use the fluid-filled plastic head and all of it, but not for medicine and not for biology. But it's often, as you know, referred to as a safety level. But I want to stress for the third time, it is just nonsense. So don't trust that at all. And more people around the world are now asking for other types of exposure measures, one being power density, for instance. But the problem here, from a scientific point of view, and it's like investigating, for instance, a gun. You know, you can weigh the gun, you can look at the color, the length, and that doesn't tell you anything about the deadly capacity of the bullet velocity hitting biological matter. And the bullet is in a cardboard box in your drawer in your desk. You are not even started to investigate it because you're weighing the gun, looking at the color. And maybe that's what we are doing now. We don't know if power density, specific absorption rate, or other measures are the ones that will help us to depict the biological and medical impact of non-ionizing radiation. So here is a big field of investigation. Then going back to what you said before about brain, um, learning capacity, attention deficit disorders, and so on. What should be mentioned is that Henry Lai at the University of Washington in Seattle already, I think it was 1994 or 96, published studies pointing to that rats that were subjected to finding their way in a maze to find food, when they were exposed, and then the exposure was 2.45 gigahertz, and at most for 45 minutes. So it was a very short exposure. But then it turned out that these rats started to make mistakes, which they normally never do. And it was interpreted as they had a decreased short term memory and a decreased concentration capacity. And then, as you said, if you go to children, is that what we want to have? And they are not exposed for 45 minutes, they're exposed for, well, 24/7 when they go to school, when they are back home, doing their homework, and so on. Don't we want to have children that have an increased short-term memory capacity, an increased concentration capacity, not the opposite? So again, I don't understand adults or parents that they don't protest. because this is, or should be at least, public knowledge. And also, there is a very famous study where they subjected boys to a linguistic task. They should solve different linguistic issues. And in this test, it was randomized. So some of the boys, they were then exposed to cell phone radiation, some were not. And they didn't know which was which. But it turned out the ones that had been exposed to cell phone radiation while doing this test, they performed less well. So again, we are back to that we are actively right now dumbing down the population. And maybe this is the explanation why certain groups in our societies, as well as certain countries, have very much limited the exposure from such gadgets in schools, for instance. One such country that were very early out was China. And as you know, China has a very, should we call it, simple business model. China wants to buy it all. United States, Sweden, and so on, you know. And to be able to excel in public business matters, of course, they need pupils and students that are super sharp so that they always can make the best, strike the best deals. Um, and therefore, they completely have forbidden that kind of gadgets in the classrooms because they want the pupils and students to concentrate on what the teacher is telling them and on the school tasks instead. Like in Sweden, for instance, there are now voices saying that we should have a reduction in what is called screen time, the amount you look at different types of screens. It could be your smartphone or your laptop or your stationary computer, because it could make you, well, in layman terms, dumber. So, yeah, there are reactions, but I think they come very slowly and maybe too late for some groups. So let's see.
Yeah. So with
And
regard,
Andrew, could I just add before you tell me something there? I feel a bit sorry for the Chinese because it's not so easy to deal with Swedes. So maybe they should rethink their business model, you know. You know, Swedes, they are very polite, very kind, but so stubborn and so private. They don't want to deal with foreigners, for instance. They want to be Swedes, and that's it. So maybe they should rethink their business model, yes.
well, having a nation want to be identified with their heritage is probably not a unique thing.
No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So just as we talked a little while ago about the fact that there are patents for using radio frequency radiation, which powers all of our smart tech.
Yeah.
There are patents that it's used to kill insects.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't have sort of both things. Is
Yeah.
it virtually good for you, or does it kill things?
Yeah.
And just
No,
as
that's a
we
very important point. Yes.
just as we have that, and we've mentioned that before. Now, with regard to the brain in particular, I believe it's the case that when a physician wants to sort of erase the blood-brain barrier for a period of time for the purpose of being able to inject some medicine that they want to go into the brain. You
Yeah.
see, because this mysterious blood-brain barrier has the ability to keep a lot of things out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I believe that there are medical devices that will sort of erase short-term the blood-brain barrier so that things can come in to the
Yeah.
brain. Please
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong in that. And then I also know that I think last time we spoke, you told me that, was it a 2-minute conversation on a cell phone will do the same thing, and you can
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong about that. But
It's even 1 minute,
1 minute.
and Yeah, the scientists thought that was short enough, but even after 1 minute and at an exposure compared to the public guidelines, that was 5,000 times weaker. So, yeah, quite far below. And then the blood brain barrier opened up, yes. And for the gadgets that could be used, oh, the amount of paperwork that you need to apply for an ethical permit
Yes.
to do such a short term intervention with the blood brain barrier of a patient, that's nearly killing the doctor instead. So, and that's fascinating because that means that the safe radiation is suddenly not safe. You need a lot of paper and stamps and yeses and so on to be able to use it in a clinical setup. And again, it doesn't make sense.
And at a very minimum, it implies that it has a physiologic effect when we're told at non-thermal levels there is no physiologic effect possible. So
Yeah.
what I want to ask is, I have a dear friend who just received a diagnosis of Parkinson's. And my thought is, how much, if any, did his habit of exposing himself to radio frequency radiation indiscriminately, how much did it affect that? And of course, the answer is we can't know.
No.
But the question is, when you erase the blood-brain barrier through these various exposures, maybe putting in hearing aids, for example,
Yeah. Yeah.
or Bluetooth wireless headbuds,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. When you do that, what kinds of might that cause problems for the brain?
Yeah, of course. And you don't need to have the point of exposure close to the head because the fields are such that you can keep the cell phone away from you and actually very, very far away from you, and you will still have impacts like leakage of the blood-brain barrier. And also there are a number of studies regarding behavioral parameters, cell damage seen in microscopes in the very areas responsible for instance, memory. We talked about short-term memory loss before, and you have a number of such studies showing damage to the DNA of the nerve cells, even cell death in certain areas. And of course, these are animal experiments, animal studies, and for ethical reasons, it's difficult, if not even impossible, to do the same studies on human brains.
Right.
And again, we don't know. We don't know, why is this person different from before? It could be an illness like Parkinson, Alzheimer, dementia of other types, and so on. And could there be different contributing factors? And the answer, as you said, we don't know. But most likely, yes, they all contribute in one way or the other. And many days I'm surprised that society is so keen on manipulating, destroying, changing even the brain and the central nervous capacity instead of protecting it actively and developing the brain. That's what we call a school. With teaching, information, education, etc. But here we have gadgets that as far as we understand, dumbs us down. And finally, there are a number of studies showing that when you're exposed to cell phone radiation, then your morality changes. So you become a more immoral. Do you say that in English? You
Yes.
lose your moral standards. And it particularly when it comes to allowance, you allow more and more to happen to other people. And again, is that really the hallmark of a democracy? I doubt it. And I would also add a moral, ethically high standing democracy based upon classical, depending on your congregation, Christian, Muslim, or whatever beliefs, how we should respect each other, love each other, take care of each other, and so on. And suddenly it is violated. So we have a let go society. We turn away from situations where we should engage. And that's what I often hear about here in Sweden. Um, I've said many times before that when I come there, talk about pollinators or bacteria, whatever, people are sort of seemingly interested, but they turn away. And when I discuss with quite sharp people, I would say, what they always tell me is, Ole, nowadays in Sweden, people just don't care any longer. No, I say they care, or do they? And when I think about it, I have a tendency nowadays to agree. The sort of wide concept of caring for each other has changed, and it's not to the better.
Yeah, I was reading. I mentioned this book earlier that Shannon wrote. It's
Yeah.
incredibly well referenced, and she was talking about the fact that there is a multi-generational study that's been going on in universities in the United States over many years. Maybe it's 50 years, I'm not sure, where they're looking at, and I'm just going from memory here, I apologize, I can't quote this study, but they're looking at the individual students' affinity for others. And
Interesting.
what they found is it was basically, going along like this until the 1980s, and then people began to care much less about the well-being of others. And I can't help but wonder how much of that had to do with this radiation exposure. You mentioned that you can essentially, you didn't use this word, but change somebody's character.
Yeah.
In terms of their preference or what they allow based on these exposures. So I guess too, it's very personal for me. My wife worked for a number of years in what we call here memory care facilities, where people who have dementia or any of a number of neurodegenerative diseases live in a lockdown facility for safety, and then they're being cared for because the ability to care for them is beyond the hope of one individual, like a spouse or even a family. Somebody's got to be watching these people all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just such a heartbreak, really. I mean, second to what happens to our children is when you affect somebody's mind, it is such a complex harm.
Yeah.
And so I wish people could be aware of not just these two things, but these two things in particular: our reproductive capability, also what happens to our children neurologically after they're born, even if they're given life, and then the neurodegenerative conditions that we have. There's a whole host of other sort of endpoints. We talked earlier about the symptoms of synthetic field exposure, and we compared them to ionizing and non-ionizing, and but there are endpoints as well that end up in chronic disease categories. And I think what we agreed in this conversation is we can't know. we just can't, because we want to prove, we want the integrity of science to exist. And yet we have more than enough reason to doubt that exposing ourselves and our loved ones to these synthetic fields is it's not, we can't say it's without harm.
No.
So,
and that's the most common question I get, actually. And that would be from a mother or father that would contact me in some way asking, this smartphone or wireless laptop, are they safe for my kid? And I have to be honest, and I always say no. I cannot say that. And then I give a few examples and tell them to do their own homework, read, contemplate, think again, and decide how should they behave, how should they expose their kids. And I have to, for various reasons, leave it to every parent to decide for their loved ones. But I could give them the tools and the directions to find knowledge. And that's what I'm trying to do every day, I would say.
Yeah. So last question with regard to neurology, and that is there a frequency following effect of the human brain? So I want to play two sounds for you. The first one is Wi-Fi. And when
Yeah.
I say I'm going to play the sound of Wi-Fi, obviously it doesn't make this sound in the average home. What we're
Nope.
really hearing is a radio frequency meter, and then we're just listening to the modulation of the signal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then this is your quiz for the day. There'll be another sound following,
Yeah.
and so I've not given you any warning about this improper testing of you at this hour and 15 minutes into this. But you see if you can tell me what the second one is, and then I want to talk about, is there a frequency following effect? So let's see if I can play this for you.
You said the first was Wi-Fi, right?
Yes.
And the second could be a smartphone.
No. Think historically.
Ah. Um,
Cold War.
oh, okay. What could it be then? No, you have to help me.
Duga,
Oh, oh,
also
I see.
also known as the wood. We knew it in the United States as the woodpecker because
Yeah, yeah.
we would hear that sound, and it was across many different frequency allocations.
And
And
this is so interesting. This is the very first time I hear the woodpecker, but I have read about it and I have been refereed to it 1,000 times. But in Sweden, it was never picked up, to the best of my knowledge.
yeah, it was
So,
pointing at North America, and
yeah,
we like to use this word colossal. So
yeah,
let me tell you about Duga One. They had several Duga facilities. That's what it was called in Russia. And this one, and I'm going by memory here, but I believe the antenna was 100 meters tall,
wow.
and I believe it was 600 meters wide.
Oh,
And I believe
oh,
the local power source was Chernobyl,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
and it
Oh,
was
this is,
thought to be up to 10 million watts of
yeah,
radiated
okay.
power
Yeah,
pointed towards North America.
yeah, yeah,
And so, really, we can just talk about Wi-Fi if you like, but it's interesting to me that both of these signals are modulated at 10 hertz.
yeah, very similar, yes.
And so my question is, based on the research, are you aware of whether the human body, our physiology, has a frequency following effect? Because, of course, there is native frequencies of the earth, and we call them the human resonances. There's more than one, there's a collection.
Yep,
But the average of the dominant frequency is right around 7.83 cycles
yeah,
per second.
yeah,
And so this is the world that we were and our ancestors were born into, and all life.
yeah,
And so the Wi-Fi signal, and coincidentally, interestingly, I think that the Duga or the woodpecker, well, both are modulated at 10 cycles per second. So
yeah, yeah,
is there a possibility that, oh, I forgot to mention the last piece is in all mammals, including people, and please tell me if I'm wrong about this, the sort of home frequency of our brain is that 7.83, coincidentally.
yeah,
So
yeah.
can this
A-
be
And
modified?
as you know, yeah, and it starts maybe down at 4 hertz, and then it moves upwards to 10, 15, 20. And it's so interesting because if I was asked to manipulate the central nervous activity, the brain and the spinal cord, then of course I would kind of tune in and see in experiments where you would have a maximum effect if you want to have an impact on the brain capacity and brain thinking. And maybe that is exactly what they did. And I don't have enough knowledge to really talk about this. But I guess that's exactly what they did. And today we would call it the electroencephalogram. And within that interval between, let's say, 4 up to 30 hertz, you would find the 10 hertz modulation there. And wow. Well, it's super interesting. And the woodpecker, of course, was done intentionally. The Wi-Fi, hopefully, is by accident that they choose that kind of 10 hertz modulation signal. Um, or, well, I leave it to you.
Well, I'm not I'm not saying the intention here. All I'm saying is, and I thought maybe it was Andrew Marino. I'm not certain, but I thought somebody looked at whether there is a frequency following effect in the human brain. A receiver. So I have a lifetime experience in radios and such.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
you have a frequency that you're listening to, and if you have it dialed in very well and a stronger signal comes over near it, it's very difficult to stay on the
yeah,
frequency that you
yeah,
want to listen to. And so
yeah,
it's a very natural thing in a receiver to then want to move just a little bit off frequency, which has the effect of now you're not actually listening to the real, and you're pulled over.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's interesting to me as I think there's so many things I would like to know that I don't know. And I'm not sure I
But could
need.
I ask? Yeah, could I ask you a very private
Oh,
question?
go ahead.
I mean, we are talking about the Russians, KGB, and whatnot. Americans, for instance, or British, like CIA or British, whatever they are called, MI5 or 6 or whatever it is, were they experimenting with similar signals going the other way? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I know ham radio. So we have the Federal Communications Commission, and you can get a
Yeah,
license to become an amateur radio operator, and then you're allowed to operate on certain frequency bands. And I know this much that the amateur radio operators of the day when this Duga was in operation, it stopped after Chernobyl went away.
yeah, yeah,
But when this was in operation, what they would do is they would line up right on that frequency, and they would have a practice session on the air practicing their Morse code, which you're allowed to do.
yeah,
And
okay.
so, and then they would notice that they would move the frequency of the
Ah,
what's
okay,
what's
I
being
see.
transmitted. So
Yeah, yeah.
that says nothing about government and whatnot. I don't know.
No, no,
I'm
no,
not I'm
okay.
not privy to any of that. My
No,
my question really gets down to people can't sleep when they have their Wi-Fi on. This is what I see again and again and again. And it was
true.
simpler years ago when there wasn't so much going on with smart appliances and whatnot. But you can maybe
Yeah,
go into somebody's home and just say, turn your Wi-Fi off. And if they were far
yeah,
away from their neighbors and weren't near a cell phone tower, then they might turn their Wi-Fi off, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I can
yeah,
sleep. I had a friend
yeah,
who that's all I suggested. And he said, I always slept great, but I've never been able to get more than 3 hours. And you told me to
yeah,
turn my
yeah,
Wi-Fi off, and now I sleep like a baby.
yeah.
So I wonder
And
whether,
Keith, yeah, Keith, this is exactly one of the studies we would like to do in a controlled, double-blind, standardized way, because I mean, just imagine the impact of any findings regarding nighttime sleep. After all, we are 8.2 billion people that need to rest and sleep. And as you say, wow, it's so common that people complain about the nighttime sleep duration, quality, if they have dreams or not, etc., etc. And as you know, already many years ago, it was found that, for instance, even power frequent electromagnetic fields will impact the nighttime sleep quality. And what they saw with radio frequency fields, if I remember correctly, was that the stage 4, what is called the rapid eye movement sleep or dream sleep, was completely obliterated. And that's serious. To lose your dreams is one thing, but during the stage 4, that's the only part during the nighttime sleep when cells in your brain, but also in your body, actually repair themselves. And if you lose that stage 4, then you are downhill. And you mentioned before the increase, the dramatic increase, and the lowering in age of dementias, including Alzheimer's. And could this be one of the contributing factors? And I say, yeah, let's investigate it.
So I'll just finish my thought on that, and maybe we'll talk about one other thing and then wrap up here. But I'll just finish my thought, which is,
Yeah.
does the reason have to do with, the sort of the gross effects of synthetic fields, from the RF from a Wi-Fi router, or is it more subtle than that? Is it that, that we can talk about there are 4 stages of cognition? You've got alpha, beta, delta, and theta.
Yeah.
And so 10 hertz is in beta.
Yeah.
And 7.83 is in alpha.
Yeah.
And sleep is found in, I don't know, delta and theta, or delta or theta. I can't remember which one it is, but.
Well, one of them. I don't remember exactly. No.
So I wonder if the effect is as simple as this. You introduce a frequency, and if there is a frequency following effect in the brain, just sort of pulling you away from you where you need to be to enjoy this REM sleep, which is arguably the most important part of our recuperation on a nightly basis. So we can't decide that between the two of us. I want to do that study.
Yeah.
I'm going to send another donation to your group. And
thank you.
I want to encourage people who are listening to this. These studies are not free, but it is so important to be able to get this information. So the last thing I want to talk about is magnetic fields and power frequent magnetic fields. Do you believe that they're harmful? And if so, what do you think are the main associations that we need to be aware of? And then I want to talk about whether they can induce current flow within the body. So your thoughts about.
Yeah. Let me first say that what you said about studies regarding sleep, I repeat, I mean, the impact on mankind, if we would find out the reasons for the deterioration of nighttime sleep, would be enormously positive. So wow, then you and I would be kind of heroes, if we could find out the details behind the reduction in nighttime sleep. Then going to power frequent fields, that's a tricky question, because when we talk about studies where people have investigated, for instance, using epidemiology over time and living close to power lines, what they were not aware of is that a power line will also carry a lot of electromagnetic disturbances. Some people call it dirty electricity, and they could be both in the kilohertz and the megahertz and so on range. And many power lines, for instance, here in Europe, are also used for power line communication, where high frequency signals are sent along the power lines. So when negative associations, for instance, with childhood leukemia was discovered, and that was pretty early in the 1990s. Maybe it was not the 50 hertz, the 60 hertz fields, but one of these electromagnetic disturbances kilohertz, megahertz, or whatnot. So there are a lot of harmonics that are traveling over the power lines. Then, of course, I mean, 50 hertz that we use here in Scandinavia, that means that the wavelength is 6,000 kilometers. Um, it's a bit hard with classical biophysical reasoning to think that it would, in its clean form, impact a human being. We are, as you know, 1.5 to 2 meters tall, but the electromagnetic disturbances being in a completely much shorter wavelength interval definitely could. So also, and we have written about this, that we also here would like to perform replications, but also new studies, not being based only on epidemiology, but also on more directed effects. And you mentioned before, for instance, navigation with birds, and if they are subjected to artificial electromagnetic fields in that kind of frequency ranges, then their navigation capacity is heavily reduced. They basically fly off in the wrong direction. So something is going on. But again, when you look upon some of those studies, it's the same problem. They haven't had a person like you that could make a detailed analysis using different metering, both in the power frequent range, but also in the radio frequency range and so on, to really describe what was used when you exposed humans or birds or whatever.
So if I understand what you're saying, we have studies like maybe the biggest one was done by Kaiser, a researcher at Kaiser Hospital, and it was a cohort, I believe, of almost 1,000 women who wore monitors for magnetic field exposure. And then they found as little as a 20-minute exposure over, I don't know, 2 milligauss was enough to significantly increase the instances of miscarriage and childhood leukemia. And I think what you're saying is that to be a proper scientist, we can't eliminate the idea that part of that harm might have been from I'll call it intermediate frequencies. Between the power line frequencies and what we generally consider to be RF. And it usually comes over the power lines, like dirty electricity. So is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. And that Kaiser study is very interesting. I think it was actually quite well performed, very detailed, but I still feel it would have been nice to just do a checkup, as you say, in the intermediate range, including also higher frequency ranges, to see if there were other types of exposures. And not diminishing the outcome, they did see changes, as you say, but what was exactly the reason for that? And again, being the world leader, I would say, okay, uh, play it safe. Don't subject people, especially vulnerable groups like pregnant women, to unnecessary exposures. Try to diminish as much as possible. And in Sweden, no one would listen, because here, no, really, pregnant women and mothers and newly born and so on, they are all constantly bombarded because people here love all their gadgets. And therefore, maybe we need to do more of these studies I mentioned before, where you change the electromagnetic environment, manipulating, for instance, the natural Schumann resonances, looking at the fertilized eggs of honeybee queens as an indicator that maybe human queens should not subject themselves to similar reductions or increased exposures to artificial synthetic fields. So that's one of, I mean, our common missions, I would say, to spread the word
Yeah.
and make people think. Um,
Yeah. There's this idea, and it's not being used in America, but the precautionary approach. Until or unless something is proven beyond doubt to be without harm,
yeah,
how about we
yeah,
avoid it? Yeah, but
yeah, yeah.
that horses left the barn
No, yeah,
is
that,
one of the things that we
yeah,
say. So it can't really
yeah.
be known based on the studies that have occurred so far, what part, and we could
No,
probably, yeah, we
yeah,
could,
but you know, it's like trees in a hard wind. They all bend in the same direction. So there is something there, but we don't know yet exactly what is causing this bending. So we need to do more studies, of course, which I, as a scientist, like. But at the same time, I want to stress that the amount of knowledge we have is so big. So a precautionary principle today is minimum. I would even be prepared to go further.
yeah. Um, the
Talking about further, I should just tell you that I see that my rechargeable battery is coming to its end.
okay,
So we need to wrap up, I would say.
we'll wrap it up. I'll just say
Yeah,
quickly that we can't. Well, the history of dirty electricity, we had a lot of brushed motors in the early days. Those were
yeah,
replaced
yeah,
long ago. When computers came on the scene, that is, modern electronics is the source of dirty electricity.
yeah.
So we would have had to have a study that was done in that period between to really get a handle on
I
what.
agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. And but you know, physicists, they tell me that time traveling will be a reality within 100 years' time. So then we go back, of course, and study, as you say, the early motors and the early electronics and so on, and compare to modern ones.
that'll be something else to talk about at our 100-year anniversary of this
Yeah,
call.
we have a lot to talk about then, you
So,
know.
all right. So, my friends, research.radiation.dk, please support Professor Olle Johansson and his
Thank
work.
you.
Ulla, thank you so much
Yeah.
for this time. You've been so generous with your time and for all that you have done so far and all the things that you're continuing to do. I
Well,
just
and
appreciate it.
Keith, whenever I think we have material for a third, a fourth, a fifth, and so on episode, because there are so much more to talk about. And if we can, as I said before, spread a few seeds and they start growing in people's minds, then we have achieved what we want to do: educate and inform.
Sounds great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Well, the same to you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.